In this video, I'm going to explain what is meant by blastocyst and what is meant by blastocyst transfer. In order to get into this topic, first let me explain to you about fertilization, embryo development and implantation. In natural conception, after ovulation, the egg is picked up by the fallopian tube and the egg is pulled into the fallopian tube to travel toward the uterus. The egg and the sperm meet in the fallopian tube where fertilization occurs. Early embryo development for the first 3 to 4 days occurs in the fallopian tube, and around 5 or 6 days after fertilization, the embryo travels to the uterus to get implanted. This implantation process happens when the embryo is in the blastocyst stage. Now in IVF, you undergo ovarian stimulation, we do egg retrieval in the operation theatre under anesthesia. So on the day of egg retrieval, we come to know how many eggs we have actually been able to retrieve and which of those eggs are mature. Your husband gives his semen sample on the day of egg retrieval. Fertilization is planned either by IVF or ICSI depending on your particular case scenario. So the fertilization is done on the day of egg retrieval. The next day is the fertilization check. So on the next day, we come to know how many eggs have successfully fertilized. So the day of egg retrieval is known as day 0 and the next day is day 1 where we do the fertilization check. So that day we see how many embryos have formed. And from there on, we need to wait and see how many of those embryos grow well in the laboratory. Some IVF centers and IVF labs have a routine practice of planning a day 2 or day 3 transfers, while some labs plan to take the embryos up to day 5 or day 6, that is still the blastocyst stage. On day 3, the embryo is known as a cleavage stage embryo, and here the embryo has about 8 cells. As the embryo grows further, it becomes a blastocyst. It goes through stages like early blastocyst, cavitated blastocyst, expanded blastocyst, and then a hatching blastocyst. A well-developed blastocyst has about 300 cells. There is an outer layer of cells known as the trophectoderm, and this ultimately leads to the placenta for the baby. And there is an inner cell mass, and this inner cell mass develops into the embryo. So what is a blastocyst transfer? Blastocyst transfer essentially means that we allow the embryo to grow in the laboratory till the blastocyst stage, which may happen on day 5 or on day 6. And after that, we plan an embryo transfer. So you may be having a fresh embryo transfer or a frozen embryo transfer. And fresh transfers or frozen transfers both can be done on day 3 or in the blastocyst stage. At our center at Nova IVF in Chembur, we routinely, particularly I always advise my patients to wait and see if the embryo is becoming a blastocyst. An embryo which has reached the blastocyst stage is a competent embryo and has better chances of leading to a pregnancy. So the entire idea with IVF is not just doing an embryo transfer. The idea is that we want to try and get you pregnant. It may happen that you have some embryos on day 3, but it may happen that those embryos don't reach the blastocyst stage. So in this scenario, doing an embryo transfer on day 3 also would not have led to a pregnancy. Hence, it is always advisable to wait and see if the embryos are growing in the laboratory till the blastocyst stage. But for that to happen, the IVF laboratory also needs to be good. The culture conditions need to be good, and that particular lab has to have a good blastulation rate. So a blastocyst transfer is something that you should definitely discuss with your fertility specialist, and you could opt for this in your very first IVF cycle. This is more so important if you have previous IVF failures.